A McLaren 720S Spider in Lantana purple worth more than $200,000 was dragged into a Charlotte auction lot on a flatbed with a handwritten tag on the broken windshield. Salvage, $500. Nobody looked twice. Nobody, except Logan Hayes, a 30-year-old mechanic standing in the corner of the bay, hands black with engine oil, eyes locked on the car and refusing to let go. He saw something no one else in that room could see. Not scrap metal, not a total loss. A machine that was still breathing, and he was going to prove it. What happens when a single father with $500 bets everything on something the world already gave up on? The fluorescent lights inside Prescott Auto Group's service wing came on at 6:15 every morning, and Logan Hayes was always already there when they did. He had worked in this building for 8 years. 8 years of arriving before anyone else, staying long after everyone had gone home, and accumulating the kind of institutional knowledge that no title on a business card and no degree on a wall could replicate. Prescott Auto Group was the largest high-end vehicle auction operation on the East Coast, headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina, and on any given week the cars moving through its loading bays represented more money than most people saw across an entire working life. The floors were polished concrete. The ceiling ran 3 stories of steel and glass. The whole organization moved with the measured confidence of a company that had never been seriously wrong about what something was worth. Logan Hayes had spent 8 years being the principal reason that confidence was occasionally justified. He was 30 years old and did not hold a college degree. He had no management title, no corner office, no professional trajectory that anyone in the building would have described as conventional. What he had was a particular kind of intelligence, the kind that lives in the hands as much as in the mind, and 8 consecutive years of refinement that had made him the most reliably accurate technical assessor in the building, by a margin that everyone in the department recognized, and that the department had never formally acknowledged. In those 8 years, Logan had personally overseen the technical evaluation and restoration pathway design of more than 40 damaged luxury and exotic vehicles. He could walk a car once, crouch beside the rocker panel, close his eyes, and tell you within 2 minutes what was broken and what the most efficient path to fixing it looked like. Samuel Carter, a 55-year-old senior appraiser who had been in the industry since before Logan was born and who was 3 months away from a retirement he had been counting toward for longer than he would admit, had once told Logan that the difference between a good technician and an exceptional one was not knowledge. Knowledge was a fixed quantity that anyone could accumulate. The difference was listening. Logan listened to cars the way other people listened to music. His personal life outside the building was quiet and precisely organized. His wife had died in a road accident 3 years earlier, and he had been raising his 7-year-old son Noah alone ever since. Every morning before leaving for work, Logan set breakfast on the kitchen counter and stuck a note to the refrigerator in his compact, careful handwriting. Back by 7. Don't forget your milk. It was not a complicated life, but it was his, and he held it with the same full attention he gave everything he worked on. Within Prescott's structure, Logan belonged to the Technical Assessment Division, the team responsible for evaluating every incoming damaged or salvage vehicle before it was classified, priced, and moved to the auction floor. His reports were meticulous and consistently right, but his reports were not final. Final authority over pricing and classification rested with one person, Jason Mercer, Prescott's chief operating officer. In the 2 months before the McLaren arrived, Logan had submitted 2 separate written recommendations to revise upward the floor valuations on vehicles he had assessed as structurally recoverable and commercially viable. Both had been rejected without explanation, without a meeting, and without so much as a follow-up email. Samuel Carter had found Logan in the bay after the second rejection and said something low and careful that had been sitting in the back of Logan's mind for 6 weeks. The vehicles being undervalued were not staying in the system long, and when they moved, they consistently moved to the same small group of names. That observation had settled in Logan's chest like a stone dropped into still water, quiet and impossible to ignore. The truck arrived on a Tuesday morning, earlier than the scheduled delivery window. Logan heard the hydraulic groan of the flatbed ramp lowering before he saw the vehicle, and he set down his torque wrench and walked to the bay door. The car that came off the ramp was a 2021 McLaren 720S Spider finished in Lantana purple, a deep metallic violet produced exclusively through McLaren's MSO Special Operations Division, made to individual specification, issued in genuinely limited numbers, and identifiable on site to anyone who had spent serious time in proximity to the brand. The car had been extraordinary once. That remained visible even now, with the entire front end collapsed inward, the left dihedral door buckled along its lower seam, the windshield gone, and the hood crumpled toward the firewall at the angle of something that absorbed a direct, high-speed frontal impact. The warehouse crew unloaded it without ceremony. One of them photographed it on his phone and sent it to a group chat. Another looked at it, shook his head, and walked away without breaking stride. The flatbed driver signed his release paperwork and was back on the highway before the dust from his tires had settled over the lot. Logan walked over slowly. He did not hurry. He crouched at the rear of the car first and examined the section from the B-pillar back, which had taken almost no damage at all. Then he moved along the driver's side, studying the buckled door from 3 separate angles. Then he lowered himself as close to the concrete as the bay allowed, and aimed his small inspection flashlight through the gap between the collapsed crash structure and the forward edge of the carbon fiber monocell chassis, the structural spine of the car, the core around which every other component was assembled, and on which every other calculation depended. He held the light steady for nearly 2 minutes. When he stood up, the fundamental assessment was complete. The monocell was intact. No fracture lines, no delamination at the visible edges. No indication of the kind of catastrophic structural failure that would have made genuine recovery impossible. The engine, McLaren's 4-liter M840T twin-turbocharged V8, mounted amidships behind the cabin, was untouched by fire, had not absorbed a direct impact load, and was physically present and complete in every way he could verify from outside. Samuel Carter appeared at Logan's left shoulder without announcing himself, the way experienced men in workshops move when they have been in the same building long enough to stop making noise about it. The two of them stood together for a moment in shared silence. Samuel noted the intact frame number and the airbag deployment pattern, consistent with a frontal impact rather than a rollover or undercarriage event, and the completely undamaged right side bodywork. Logan asked who had brought it in. Samuel had the transfer documentation listed Harbor Bridge Insurance Partners out of Raleigh as the originating party. No direct contact from the registered vehicle owner. No police incident report attached. Only an initial damage assessment form classifying the vehicle as a total loss. Logan asked to see the complete paperwork. He read through it 3 times. There was no accident scene photograph, no law enforcement incident number, a damage report, a salvage classification, and a chain of custody transfer form, and in the field where the registered owner was required to sign confirming voluntary surrender of the vehicle, the line was blank. It was a small omission, the kind that would pass without notice in a stack of routine paperwork unless you were specifically looking for it. Logan photographed every page with his personal phone. Then he photographed the car from 16 different angles. Then he entered the vehicle identification number into the company's internal system and read what came back. Registered owner, Evelyn Cole, Charlotte, North Carolina. Status of owner contact confirmation, blank. He looked at the screen, he looked at the car. Something that had been a question rearranged itself into a certainty with a particular, unwelcome weight. Logan stayed in the building that evening until after 9 o'clock, preparing the formal technical assessment report he was required to file before any salvage vehicle above $50,000 in declared value could be moved to classification. Under Prescott's own written protocol, a mandatory 72-hour evaluation window applied. Logan documented the intact monocell, the undamaged drivetrain, the recoverable bodywork components, the airbag system restoration requirements, and the realistic parts sourcing pathway for every damaged section of the car. His conclusion was unambiguous. This vehicle was not a commercial total loss. Restoration to market-grade condition was technically achievable within a defined cost range. Conservative post-restoration market value between $150,000 and $170,000. Recommended auction floor no less than $80,000. He filed the report at 9:17 in the evening, logged out, and drove home. The next morning, the car was gone. Logan stood in the space on the concrete where it had been and looked at it for a long moment before finding the warehouse supervisor and asking very quietly what had happened. Processed early. Orders from Mr. Mercer. Logan went to the internal transaction system. The entry was time-stamped at 5:48 that morning before the building was officially open for business. Sold. $500. Buyer Ridgeline Recovery LLC. He read it twice. Then he took the elevator to the 3rd floor without stopping to consider what he was going to say, because what he was going to say had already arranged itself before he reached the door. Jason Mercer was 42 years old and occupied his office the way men of a particular kind occupy spaces. as though everything surrounding them exists primarily as confirmation of their standing. The suit was charcoal gray and well cut. The watch was a Breitling Navitimer. When Logan walked through the door unannounced, Mercer's expression registered something practiced and flat. Not surprise and not contempt exactly, but the controlled version of both that a man develops when he has anticipated a confrontation and decided in advance how much weight it will carry. Logan placed his phone on the desk face up, photographs visible, and presented the technical assessment in precise terms. What the car was, what its structure demonstrated, what the recovery path looked like, and what the real-world valuation range was for a vehicle in this condition with this history. He kept his voice level. He was not making an argument or registering a complaint. He was presenting a sequence of documented, verifiable facts in front of the person whose authority over those facts he had spent 8 years respecting. Mercer looked at the photographs. He looked at Logan. He said the car had carried a salvage title and had been assessed as having no viable commercial recovery value. He said the evaluation window had been applied at management's discretion under the terms of existing policy. And then he said the sentence that carried the most weight of anything spoken in that room. "You are a mechanic, Hayes. You are not a valuator. You are not a decision-maker. Are we clear?" Logan left without answering and went directly to the internal legal office. He did not stop at his workstation. He did not speak to anyone in the hallway. He walked with the particular economy of movement of a man who has already decided what he is going to do and is simply executing the next step. The attorney on duty was a young woman named Madison, less than a year with the company, who pulled the McLaren documentation at Logan's request and grew quiet for an uncomfortable stretch of time before she spoke. She could not locate a signed owner authorization form confirming voluntary title surrender by the registered owner. There was a transfer document on file bearing what appeared to be a valid signature, but it was executed by an intermediary party, not by Evelyn Cole. Logan asked the name of the intermediary. She turned her screen toward him. Harbor Bridge Insurance Partners, LLC. He wrote it down. He tried to reach Evelyn Cole that afternoon from his personal phone, using the contact details in the company system. No answer. A text went unreplied. An email bounced back as undeliverable. He cross-referenced both against the North Carolina DMV's public vehicle registration records. The phone number in Prescott's system did not match the number on the original registration. The email address did not match either. The contact information inside the company's internal records had been quietly altered. When, and by whose hand, would require access he did not have. Samuel Carter came to find him at 5:30 and closed the bay door behind him. He had spent the afternoon tracing Ridgeline Recovery LLC through Delaware's public corporate filings. The company had no physical address. It had been registered 14 weeks earlier. Its sole listed director carried no traceable history in the automotive or insurance industries. But the registered agent contact number, the single phone line on file with the state, matched, after 3 hours of methodical cross-referencing, the personal mobile number of someone directly connected to Prescott's management structure. Samuel would not say the name aloud. He needed one more piece confirmed. His expression said everything his voice was being careful to withhold. Logan sat with that information for 20 minutes. Then he opened the employee portal on his personal phone and navigated to Clause 14B of Prescott's internal transaction policy. In the event of a completed salvage sale below assessed floor value, a current Technical Assessment Division employee retained the right to match the recorded transaction price and claim title within 72 hours of the sale timestamp. The McLaren had been sold at 5:48 that morning. It was 5:51 in the evening. He was inside the statutory window by fewer than 2 hours. He looked at his bank balance, $1,847. He looked at the empty concrete. Then he called the administrative office and said, "I want to exercise Clause 14B. Vehicle VIN ending 4471. I am matching the recorded price of $500. The termination letter was on his workbench the following morning, inside a plain white envelope with his name printed on the outside, effective immediately. Violation of internal transaction protocol. Creation of a conflict of interest. The language was clean and legal and precise. Logan read it standing up, still in his work jacket, and then set it back on the bench and looked through the bay door toward the loading area, where the McLaren sat in the cleared title staging section with a transfer ticket bearing his name clipped to the passenger side mirror. Jason Mercer had moved before dawn. The termination document had been prepared and signed before Logan arrived. The message required no interpretation. You saw something you were not meant to see, and now you will leave. Logan did not request a meeting, appeal to human resources, or compose a reply of any kind. He went to the locker room and packed his personal tools into a plastic storage bin, his own set of torque instruments, a worn McLaren technical service manual with a cracked spine, and a photograph of Noah that had been taped to the inside of his locker door for 2 years. He signed the acknowledgement form without reading it again, asked the warehouse coordinator one question: could the vehicle be transported that afternoon, and was told yes. He said thank you, and he meant it with complete sincerity. Samuel Carter walked him to the parking lot. He held Logan's hand for a moment longer than a handshake requires, and when he spoke he kept his voice below the wind. He would keep working. What he had found the previous day was enough to pull on, and he intended to pull on it carefully and as far as it went. He told Logan to do what he needed to do and not stop doing it. Logan said, "Watch yourself." Samuel nodded, and they separated without another word, and that was precisely all that needed saying. The flatbed delivered the McLaren to Logan's garage on a Wednesday evening as the last light was going flat over the rooftops. He moved his own truck to the driveway to make room, backed the car in as far as it would go, and stood looking at it under the white fluorescent shop lights for a long time without doing anything at all. He was not building up to the work. He was simply recognizing the full weight of what he had committed to: the car, the debt, the time, the probability of failure, and letting it settle into something he could carry without flinching. Outside the auction yard, outside company property and institutional obligation, the car looked different. It looked like a specific kind of problem waiting for a specific kind of attention. He pulled out his folding stool, sat down, opened his laptop, and typed 2 words at the top of a blank document: Day 1. The scope of the work when listed in full was not encouraging. The front crash structure, destroyed, requiring sourcing and complete replacement. The hood, non-recoverable. Both front fenders, damaged beyond straightening. The headlight assemblies, absent. The windshield, required replacement. The complete airbag system, sensors, control modules, all physically deployed units, needed to be reset and in several cases physically replaced. The left dihedral door required significant metalwork to return to functional alignment and factory tolerance fitment. Through authorized dealership channels, the parts cost for this list alone would exceed $60,000. Logan had $1,347 in his account after the purchase and the transfer fee. He was not a man who panicked, but he was a man who understood arithmetic clearly. He closed the cost spreadsheet, opened a new document, and began writing a different kind of list. Every person he had worked alongside in 8 years of the industry, and what each one might be able to do. The first call Logan made the next morning was to Carter Simmons, an independent recovery specialist in Raleigh who had spent 30 years operating in the margins of the exotic car trade, moving between impound auctions, salvage sourcing networks, and private transactions that existed entirely within relationships and were invisible to anyone who had not invested years in building them. Simmons had no website. He did not need one. Logan had worked with him on 3 previous projects over the years, and the arrangement had always been direct. Logan identified what needed fixing. Simmons found the material. Within 24 hours of the call, Simmons had located a 2020 McLaren 720S that had been totaled in a highway incident in Tennessee the previous spring. Its entire front end was pristine. Its left side was destroyed, the mirror image of what Logan needed. Logan drove to Raleigh on Thursday morning, inspected every component in person, and returned with a complete front crash structure, both front fenders, a replacement hood, and the front bumper beam loaded in the truck bed. $3,200 on a credit card that had not been used in over a year. The first week ran in long, unbroken sessions that began before sunrise and ended after midnight. Logan stripped the McLaren's front section down to bare carbon, documented every component coming off the car, labeled and organized each piece in bins along the garage wall, and began preparing the monocell attachment surfaces for new bodywork. The left dihedral door he worked on every evening after 8 o'clock, using a carbon fiber frame alignment kit he had bought for a previous project and never returned. The process of straightening a dihedral door frame on a car like this demands patience rather than force. The same calibrated incremental correction, applied to precisely the right points in precisely the right sequence, repeated over 5 consecutive evenings until the door closed with the sealed mechanical precision it had left the factory floor with in Woking. While Logan's hands were occupied with the car, Samuel Carter was working a parallel line of inquiry that would have been invisible to anyone not watching for it. He had located Evelyn Cole through the state's public vehicle registration records. her real address not the altered version in Prescott's system, and driven to her home in the Dilworth neighborhood on a Friday afternoon. Evelyn Cole was 58 years old, composed and genuinely confused. She had not known her car was gone. She had been engaged in a routine insurance claim following a rear-end collision that had proven more structurally damaging than it initially appeared, and she had signed a document she was told was a standard appraisal authorization, permission for an independent assessor to estimate repair costs on her behalf so that the insurance company could process her claim. She still had her original copy in a folder in her kitchen. Samuel photographed every page before he left her home. In the second week, Logan turned to the engine. The M840T started on the first key cycle, which confirmed the essential integrity of the powertrain. But at idle there was an asymmetrical low-frequency vibration that was not normal, a mechanical signature he recognized without hesitation as originating in the left turbocharger. He pulled the unit and found exactly what the signature had indicated. A single turbine blade bent fractionally out of tolerance by a pressure event transmitted back through the intake at the moment of impact. The engine itself had never been touched. He ordered a reconditioned turbocharger from a specialist in Florida, charged it on the same credit card, and used the 5-day delivery window to address the complete electrical system. Replacing every deployed airbag module, resetting the engine control unit, verifying every sensor in the stability and traction management architecture, and resoldering 2 data connections in the driver's side door harness that had been partially severed during the crash. He slept fewer than 4 hours on most nights that week and did not once consider stopping. When the replacement turbocharger arrived, he installed it in a single 7-hour session and started the engine for the second time. The asymmetrical vibration was gone. The 4-liter twin-turbocharged V8 settled into the specific idle McLaren's engineers had calibrated for it, a layered, precise mechanical resonance that occupied the border between pure engineering and something harder to categorize. Logan sat on the stool with his arms resting on his knees and let the engine run for 20 minutes without touching anything at all. The third week brought the most expensive and most irreversible decision of the entire project: the paint. Lantana Purple did not exist in any standard refinishing formula available to the body repair industry. It was an MSO exclusive, a proprietary pigment blend for which a colorist required either McLaren's original specification data or the kind of accumulated skill that could reconstruct it from a surviving sample. Logan called 3 Charlotte body shops. 2 declined immediately. The third belonged to Adrian Wells, who had been refinishing exotic vehicles for more than 30 years and who had worked on 2 previous Prescott restorations under Logan's technical oversight. Wells agreed to take the job. He asked Logan to bring the car on a Monday morning. Logan had it there at 6 o'clock to avoid traffic. He stayed at the shop for 4 days. Wells worked from the original factory color code, a small section of undamaged original paint Logan had preserved inside the left door jamb throughout the entire restoration, and 4 decades of trained intuition about how light and pigment interact. The result, when it came out of the booth on Thursday afternoon, was exact. The depth of the color in direct light, the way the metallic particles shifted between violet and cobalt depending on the angle, was indistinguishable from what it had been on the day the car left the production line. Logan had the windshield replaced on Friday. The headlight assemblies went in on Saturday. By the 26th day, the car no longer looked like a project or a salvage piece or an argument in the process of being constructed. It looked like what it had always been, a machine built to a standard that almost nothing else produced on the public road could match. On the 29th day, Logan spent 3 hours on the interior, deep cleaning every surface, conditioning both leather seats with a professional-grade restoration kit, replacing the damaged section of the headliner. The result was not factory perfect, and he did not represent it as such. There was no part of the car he had touched that he could not completely account for. That was the only standard he held himself to, and it was the only one that had ever mattered to him. On the 30th evening, Logan stood in the garage with the overhead lights at full and looked at the McLaren for a long moment before raising his phone and taking a single photograph. Then he opened the folder labeled Day 1 and looked at the image he had taken 30 days earlier in the Prescott yard in the early morning before anyone else had arrived. He placed the 2 images side by side on the screen and looked at them together without speaking. He did not share them anywhere. A single message arrived from Samuel Carter. 4 words: Diana wants to meet. Monday. The conference room on the 15th floor of Prescott's headquarters had floor-to-ceiling windows on the south wall and a table long enough for 14. On the Monday morning that Logan entered it for the first time, there were 7 people present. Diana Prescott at the head of the table, the company's internal legal counsel to her left, an independent forensic investigator to her right, Samuel Carter along one side, and 2 chairs that had clearly been positioned for Logan and for someone who was not coming. Jason Mercer's chair had not been left empty. It had been removed from the room entirely. Diana Prescott was 34 years old and had taken the chief executive role following her father's retirement 4 years earlier. She had restructured internal processes, established a reputation for directness that was not common in the auction world, and carried the company name with the particular gravity of someone who had weighed that inheritance before accepting it. She looked at Logan when he sat down and said, "Before any agenda item was introduced or any document was opened, I need to hear it from you first. Everything you know, in order, from the beginning." Logan had printed copies of everything: the day 1 photographs, his original assessment notes, the transaction record showing the 548 timestamp and the $500 figure, the documentation on the ownership confirmation gap, the corporate registration information on Ridgeline Recovery LLC. He laid each page on the table in sequence and moved through it chronologically, without editorializing, without accusation, and without the kind of loaded language that turns facts into arguments before the facts have had the chance to stand on their own. Samuel Carter spoke next and placed on the table a side-by-side comparison of 2 documents. The original authorization form Evelyn Cole had signed, granting an appraiser the right to estimate repair costs on her behalf, and the title surrender document that Prescott had received bearing what appeared to be the same signature. The content of the 2 forms was completely different. One was a limited cost assessment authorization. The other transferred the vehicle out of her legal ownership. The signatures matched. The documents did not. The room went quiet in the specific way it goes quiet when the last piece of something confirms what everyone present had already begun to understand but had not yet been able to say aloud. The forensic investigator presented 3 days of findings. Ridgeline Recovery LLC and Harbor Bridge Insurance Partners LLC shared a registered agent address in Delaware. The sole listed director of Ridgeline had no traceable background in either the automotive or insurance industries. Beneficial ownership of the company traced through 2 corporate layers, connected to a family member of a senior Prescott employee, a relationship that, taken together with the transaction pattern, established a direct and undisclosed financial interest in systematically undervalued vehicle acquisitions. And the McLaren was not an isolated case. In the 18 months prior to the current investigation, 9 separate vehicles had moved through an identical sequence: a damage classification inconsistent with technical assessment data on file, a rapid sale to Ridgeline or an associated entity at a price dramatically below estimated recovery value, and a subsequent private resale at figures precisely consistent with what Logan and his colleagues had originally recommended. The total documented gap between recorded sale prices and subsequent resale figures across all 9 vehicles exceeded $1,200,000. Evelyn Cole joined by video call. She was calm in the way that people are calm when they have made a decision before a meeting begins that the truth is going to come out regardless of how it feels to speak it. She confirmed that she had never agreed to sell her car. She confirmed that she had signed what she was told was a routine authorization form, had received it back from Harbor Bridge with a brief assurance that it was standard procedure, and had assumed her vehicle was being assessed, not surrendered. She had heard nothing from Prescott until Samuel Carter appeared at her door. Her voice did not falter. Her hands, visible at the edge of the camera frame, were not entirely still. Diana Prescott made 3 decisions in the room before the meeting formally concluded. Jason Mercer was suspended immediately, with full referral to law enforcement. Evelyn Cole would receive complete legal representation at the company's expense through the full process of recovering her vehicle rights and financial losses. And Logan Hayes was offered reinstatement to his former position, effective immediately, with full back pay for the entire period of his termination. Logan looked at the table before responding. Then he looked up and said there was one thing he needed to confirm first. He asked about the legal status of the car, specifically his own title. The company's counsel reviewed the transaction records and said the original $500 sale was subject to legal challenge on grounds of fraudulent documentation, but Logan's exercise of Clause 14B had been procedurally valid and had been executed within the statutory window. His title was current and uncontested in the absence of a specific court ruling to the contrary. The car was his. Then I want to bring it here. Logan saw Jason Mercer once more before the week was out. Not by design, and not in any space either of them would have chosen. It was in the parking structure beneath the Prescott building on a Thursday afternoon, while Mercer was loading personal items from his former reserved space into the trunk of his car. He saw Logan walking toward the elevator and stopped. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Mercer said something he had probably rehearsed as dismissal, but which arrived carrying a different weight than he intended, something older and less controlled. He said, "You think you accomplished something, Hayes?" He said, "You are a mechanic." Logan stopped walking. He stood there for a few seconds with his hands in his jacket pockets. Then he said, "You are right. I am a mechanic. I know what is worth fixing and what is not." He turned and walked to the elevator and did not look back. That was the whole of their final exchange. It required nothing more. Diana Prescott had proposed something Logan had not anticipated. Prescott's final auction of the month, a curated specialist sale attended by collectors, private dealers, and senior industry figures, was scheduled for the following Friday evening. She asked Logan to bring the McLaren, not to sell it, to present it, to let it stand in front of the people most qualified to understand what they were looking at and speak for itself. She said the company owed him that stage. Logan thought about it for 24 hours and said yes. The car arrived on the flatbed at 4 in the afternoon, 2 hours before the first guests. Logan drove it off the ramp himself and positioned it at the center of the main floor, where the overhead lighting caught the lantana purple at an angle that turned the surface into something between color and light. A senior appraiser from the Northeast, a man with 4 decades in the industry whose assessments had the weight that came from being consistently right over a very long period, walked around the car twice without speaking. He crouched at the left door and examined the alignment. He ran his hand along the leading edge of the hood. He looked at the gap between the door sill and the rocker panel, the headlight fitment, the seam lines at the fenders. Then he stood and asked, without looking away from the car, who had done the work. Logan said, "I did." The man nodded once, the particular unhurried nod of someone whose appraisal has just been confirmed by direct physical evidence rather than by testimony. Evelyn Cole arrived before the guests and stood in front of the car for a long time before she touched it. She placed her hand on the front fender, the one sourced from Tennessee, fitted and finished in a residential garage by a man who had lost his income to put it there. And she looked at Logan and said, "Thank you, not for the car, for not walking away." Logan said he was glad Samuel had found her. She said she had almost not answered the door. Diana Prescott addressed the assembled guests in a statement that was brief by duration and not brief in what it contained. She said that a failure of internal oversight had allowed a pattern of systematic undervaluation to operate inside her company for more than a year without detection, and that the responsibility for that failure was institutional in origin and began at the level of her own leadership. She said, "It begins with me." She said those words without qualification and without the kind of carefully constructed framing that softens accountability into something easier to receive. Then she said Logan Hayes' name. She said this man had no institutional authority, no budget, and no guarantee of any outcome. He looked at something every other person in this organization had already written off and decided that what he saw in it was worth his complete and undivided effort. He did not wait for permission. He did not wait for a title or a committee or a vote. He went and did the work. That is not a small thing, not in this industry and not in any other. After the guests had cleared out and the floor had gone quiet, Diana asked Logan to stay. A folder was on the table. Inside it was a formal offer for a newly created position, Director of Technical Valuation, with independent authority to establish and protect assessment floors across all incoming inventory, reporting directly to her office. The compensation was nearly double what he had been earning. Logan looked at the offer sheet, then looked at Diana and said, "I do not have a management degree." She said, "I am not looking for a management degree. I am looking for someone who knows how to look at something and tell the truth about what he sees." Logan signed the offer sheet that evening with a ballpoint pen he borrowed from the front desk and returned when he was done. 3 weeks later, Logan moved into his new office, a glass-walled room overlooking the service floor, positioned at his own request so that the assessment bay was visible from his desk at all times. Samuel Carter retired on the date he had been counting toward for years, but agreed to serve as a paid part-time consultant for the following 6 months, arriving 3 mornings a week to sit with the new assessment team with the unhurried patience of a man who understands that leaving something well is as important as building it well. The legal process surrounding Evelyn Cole's vehicle concluded faster than any of the attorneys had expected. The court found the original title surrender document invalid on grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation, voiding the $500 transaction entirely. Evelyn was confirmed as the legal owner of record, received full insurance compensation for the original collision damage, and was formally notified of the car's restored condition and independent appraised value. In an email she sent to Logan a week after the ruling, she said she had taken the McLaren to an authorized dealer for an independent assessment. The figure they had given her was $171,000. She said she was not selling it. She said, "Not because of the money." On a Thursday evening, Logan arrived home exactly when the note on the refrigerator said he would. Noah was at the kitchen table with a drawing in front of him, and without looking up he asked what his father had been so busy with for the past month. Logan sat down across from him and said, "Fixing a car." Noah asked if it was special. Logan thought about it for a moment, the way a man thinks about a question that deserves a real answer rather than a convenient one, and then he said, "Not because it was expensive, because nobody thought it was worth fixing anymore." The value of a thing is never determined by the person who gives up on it. It is determined by the person willing to look again.